We all talk about structural reform all the time. In Europe, we discuss it constantly because of our crisis. Most parts of the world do. Much of your 5-year plan is about structural reform. And we all know that change is essential in our personal lives. It happens all the time, even with our planet, with climate change. So things are changing all the time and we must adapt to change. What I'd like to focus on today is how foreign direct investment can help us with driving the sort of change that we need in our own economies and societies. For economies and societies, change is a very difficult thing. One reason is complexity. Jean-Claude Juncker, now the President of the European Commission, many years ago said, "We know what we need to do, the problem is getting elected after we do it." That's actually not true. We don't know what we need to do in many cases. How we design healthcare systems, how we design education innovation systems, there's no one correct answer. So there's an awful lot of complexity in governing in the modern world. So that is one big problem that we have in terms of designing, doing things. Another example are modern currencies. The internationalization of the RMB is a very difficult, complex, delicate task. We in Europe underestimated the complexity of our single currency, and we've paid a big price for that. So complexity is one big problem, but politics is another problem. Anytime we reform, usually there are people who lose because of reform, and the people who win may not even know they'll win. So there's a balance of forces. The point I'd like to make today is that foreign direct investment helps push the balance closer to the winners so that it moves the reform momentum and dynamic. Okay, so I'd like to just do 3 things in the next 8 minutes. Look at foreign direct investment trends, look at structural reform trends, and then consider the relationship between the two. Foreign direct investment trends. Foreign direct investment, in my view, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, change in the structure of the global economy. The multinationalization of the firm has transformed production processes. As we know, over the past quarter of a century, since the 1980s, since the current wave of globalization began, the world economy has grown a lot. We know that world trade volumes have grown a lot more than GDP, but we also know that FDI has grown more than both. And a very important statistic according to the United Nations, and this is true since the 1990s, that the sales of foreign subsidiaries are greater than total export volumes or values. Okay, so in fact, what companies, the foreign subsidiaries of companies do is now probably more important than what companies in home markets sell to other markets. And let me just do some of the statistics just to show how much FDI has changed over time. I pressed the wrong button. Okay, so if we go back to the 1990s, the stock, the accumulated stock of FDI has grown massively over that time and now stands at around $25 trillion. And just for comparison, that's more than twice China's annual GDP. And it's been very much a global phenomenon. If we look at every region of the world, we see that this is happening. And China is a particularly interesting case. While it's already been alluded to that China is a surplus savings country, and this drives its current account balance, for foreign direct investment, it's the decisions of corporations that really drive outward FDI. And we've seen an extraordinary increase in Chinese outward FDI. In 2004, it was around $5 billion. In 2014, it had risen to $120 billion. That's not 200, 300, 400%. That's more than a 20-fold increase. And a lot of that is happening because Chinese companies are getting to a critical mass where they have become global and they're capable of moving abroad and penetrating foreign markets using foreign affiliates. Now that has happened to some extent up to now, mostly by acquiring other companies, but increasingly it's happening by the establishment of greenfield entities. An example is Huawei, a global company which now in my country has 3 separate facilities that it operates in Ireland. These aren't acquired, these aren't existing companies, these are greenfield entities that it has established. And that tends to be the pattern for FDI, and it would seem to me that the opportunity for Chinese companies to invest in Europe, and Europe is the biggest destination for FDI in the world, is enormous. Okay, so they're just some of the trends. Let's look at reform. Reform is harder to measure because we can't put a dollar value on it. So the World Bank, for example, has an ease of doing business index, which is a good way of measuring how reform is going. The World Economic Forum in Switzerland also does. My preferred one is this, mainly because I used to work on this. I worked for this organization for a long time. So its rankings look at the entire world and nearly every country in the world. And it covers many things, but it mostly covers things that we describe as structural in nature. Now, what do the rankings of the EIU say? Well, it's quite positive. It also shows that structural reforms are happening in every region of the world. Maybe not huge, maybe it's not big in some places, but by this measure, structural reform is gradually happening everywhere. So most countries are improving their business environments. Now, what's the link? Okay, it's not possible to say with absolute certainty that because FDI is increasing and because structural reform is taking place, that they are directly, one causes the other. Of course, there's a direction of causality issues. But I think it's, certainly from observation, it's very easy to find politicians and policymakers making decisions that change the way they do things with the objective of attracting investment. So when I arrived in China on Thursday, I was hoping I could find an example. And on that very day, I opened the China Daily, and on the very front page, this story caught my eye. So Premier Li says that China will create a more transparent and equal market to attract foreign investment in big data and e-commerce. So this is both good for Chinese companies, but the rationale for doing this is to attract foreign investment. My point is that this is something that's good for the business environment, but it's being pushed, as Premier Li says, because of the need to attract foreign investment in the sector. Okay, so what do we know? Again, that issue about correlation. We certainly know that countries that are richer tend to have higher levels of FDI. We also know, again, according to UNCTAD, the UN agency that follows direct investment most closely, that policies over time have been overwhelmingly favorable to FDI rather than attempting to block it, as used to be the case many decades ago. We know that these sort of agencies that attract FDI and the companies involved can act as a counterweight to protectionist and anti-reform powers, so they can tilt the balance towards improving the business environment and at the same time help to stop policies that might be bad for the business environment. So to conclude, it seems to me that there's a huge opportunity between Asia and between China and Europe to increase foreign direct investment flows, and that not only will increase prosperity, but will also help to drive the structural reform agenda in both parts of the world. Thank you.